it's Natasha and thank you so much for joining me today. So I am going to have a whole lot of fun doing some weaving today. I have been wanting to try this for a while. In fact, I literally have a list written in my little craft space of all the techniques and things I want to try on cards. So I am working my way through it. I am going to use my favorite Wildflowers BoBunny stamp set. This is a great stamp set, and as you guys will know, I have cut apart the stamps in here and I have gotten so much more use out of them. So don't be afraid to cut them apart if you're going to get more use that way. I am using some Belle VersaFine clear ink. And I am just going to be stamping on, I just have like a large piece of paper here. It's not quite the 8.5 by 11 inches, but it's just a piece of, this is 80 pound Nina Solar White, and I'm stamping just all over this. Honestly, the pattern does not matter very much at all. I'm just filling it up, and it won't quite be as stark as this, so don't worry, we're going to kind of change this look quite a bit. But I did want to make sure that I used a permanent ink here so that it didn't shift around when I did the next pieces on top of it. Now I actually ended up having to do, I think I did another sheet as well. I didn't measure the size of the sheets. I did another smaller sheet than this one because that's how much I needed. But I'm just showing you one on camera because you get the idea of where we're going. This is some Broken China Distress Oxide ink. Now I know that this feels dramatic, but at the time when I was doing this, I thought I wanted some white spots, so I'm kind of not going super thorough, but I ended up covering most of it up. And then just because the color was quite dark, I did spray some water on, but because this was not watercolor cardstock and there had been some time gone, not too much color came off at all. So you don't really need to worry about that step at all. But I am going to dry this thoroughly because I want to make sure that the oxides are dry, the VersaFine clear is dry, and also the water that I sprayed on it is all gone. Because I am going to cut this into strips. Now I think I ended up doing 3/4 of an inch wide strips, but that is because I am making a larger card today. I'm going to make my first ever 5x7 card base. Now I am making this for somebody and they need a nice large card because lots of people, lots of the staff are going to be writing inside of it. So that's why it's a big card. And I am going to be adding some chipped sapphire to the edges of these strips. Now I know that this is a little bit time consuming, but I definitely am glad that I did this step. It brings the strips to life and it separates them really nicely. So this can be done really quickly, and honestly it didn't take too long at all. And if you didn't want to do this step, you could probably just run your ink pad down the sides of all the strips. However, I think this little blended look, you get a little bit more ink on there, and that was definitely what I was after. So as I said, the pattern that we stamped at the very beginning with the VersaFine clear does not matter at all. You don't read much into that pattern or that you stamped, so it didn't have to be perfect. And here are all my strips ready to go. And from here, this is going to create the background, so I need to create the focal point. And I just took one big large stamp. I've shown this many in videos before, so if you would like to go and see some more, then I will try and link some down below. Now for this, I am going to be using some watercolor cardstock, and I'll show you why in just a minute. I'm using some VersaFine clear pigment inks to stamp these in the Summertime, Golden Meadow, and Cheerful ink colors. First up, I'm going to be stamping with the Summertime, which is the orange, and then I do add a tiny little bit of the Golden Meadow, which is the dark yellow kind of color. And because I am going to be heat embossing these, I want to use my anti-static powder bag. Now the reason I'm using pigment inks is because not only for their color, but it means that I am able to stamp all of my images, and then because pigment ink sits on top of the paper, whereas dye ink sort of settles in and sinks into the paper, I am able to add some embossing powder after I've stamped all these images, and the ink stays nice and wet and grabs onto the embossing powder. In this case, I'm using Clair, and I'm just going to cover all 3 images, and then I will heat these with my heat tool, and that melts all of the powder. Now every time I do this and I watch this on screen, it makes me nervous when I heat emboss and I use my heat tool with the embossing powder still sitting out underneath it, but generally I have got it pointed away in a different direction, I promise. So I have heat set all of these, and you can see that the color's changing to be glossy and bright, and that way I know that everything is all melted and it leaves a nice little shine. Now I am going to do a few little leaves, and again I'm going to use this Stampendous Cling set. I know that this one is discontinued and I apologize. This just seems to be my go-to leaves, and I think everybody kind of has those little go-tos in their collection, and this is it for me. So I picked out a couple of different greens, a dark and a light, because at this point I just wasn't sure kind of which way I wanted to sway the card, but in the end I felt like that dark green was just a little bit better. I think it was going to work out a little bit better, but I still heat embossed all of them. I did the same treatment as I did with the sunflowers, and I know that these aren't sunflower leaves. I'm okay with that, and I don't think that the recipient of the card will be too concerned that I haven't got the correct leaves. That's okay. Now to quickly colour these, I'm using Spiced Marmalade, Wild Honey, and some fossilized amber. I have got my little non-stick sheet down. Now this is actually the replacement mat for the glass mixed media surface that Tim Holtz has. I do not own the glass mat at all, but I find this little non-stick mat, which has the silicone backing on the back of it, is perfect size for my workspace, and it's got a really good price point, so it works out. Now I am just dabbing these inks in and out of the oxide. These are distress oxides. I add a little bit of water. This time it's the mustard seed and the fossilized amber. I'm sort of slightly going lighter and lighter as we go, and then this will be for the middle sunflower. Now color these by any which means you want to. This is just what I felt like doing today, and I kind of moved the ink around with my fingers, and I clearly felt like getting inky and doing it that way. But if you want to use watercolor pencils, or you want to use Copic markers or alcohol markers, or you want to use anything at all, do any method that works for you, that you enjoy coloring. This is just what I felt like doing today. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the leaves as well. Once I have got all of these dry, sometimes I dry them a little bit and then dip them back into the ink, and that gives them a little bit more texture, adding those splotches and things after the first layer of ink has dried. Then I did remember I wanted to do a stem as well, so I'm just going to cut that. I pretty much, when I'm doing stems, I kind of like the organic look of just cutting it myself, rather than cutting a nice straight strip on a trimmer. So I just cut it out with some scissors. I'm adding a couple of different greens, the same ones that I use for the leaves, and dunking it in, drying it, and then dunking it back in, a bit more ink and a bit more water, just until I'm kind of happy with how it looks. As I said, I was having a nice play around with inks today, and having fun. Now I am going to do something to this a little bit later on, because at the moment it looks different to the rest of our images. But just while I remember, I was thinking about the inside of my sunflower, and I used some vintage photo because I wanted it to be kind of a nice browny color in the center, and that again gives a little bit more definition to our flower. Now, how to put all three of these layers together? Well, this is the lightest sunflower, and this one is going to go on the top. And I'm going to cut around the first layer of leaves that I can see in this stamped image. Now, if you don't have like an image that works like this one does today, then just take a normal image and cut it out 3 different times, and then just turn them so that they're not all lined up when you put them one on top of the other, and that creates a beautiful layered look as well. So you don't have to have a flower that has all these different petals or anything going on. If you just layer up the same stamped image, but don't line them up when you stick them together, kind of turn them around so that they're in all different places, then you will get a very similar look as well. Now I am just fussy cutting around all of these. I am not being fussy with where I kind of end up going, because honestly it doesn't really matter. You can see I've got all 3 of my layers, which we'll put together in just a minute. For my sentiment, I've kept it nice and simple with the stamp set here, which you guys are well familiar with by this point. And this is a thank you card. As I said, this is going to someone who is leaving their position at their workplace. So this is a thank you from everybody. Now see our stamped images there, they have that outline that I stamped, and I obviously don't have that here on the stem that I cut. Now I was going to use my zig marker to kind of go along the outside, but that did not go to plan and did not work. So I went back to my finger daubers, And I think this is the colour Rustic Wilderness, and I'm just inking up a little bit along the edge, and this works even better, and it kind of almost looks like it has the stamped edges, and it just fits in a little bit better with the sunflower and the leaves that I stamped. Now here's how I'm going to put together my woven background. So start off with the first layer of one going horizontal and the others going vertical. Now the one horizontal down the bottom, I get it exactly portioned right, I hold it in my hands, and then I put a piece of low-tack tape down the bottom to hold it. When I thread the rest of these through, they basically sit in place because they are over, under, so they sit nicely. Once I think I have the exact placement of everything, and I just want those little white squares that are the gaps between the strips, they are all nice and even. The little piece of white paper that I have behind here is a piece of 80-pound Nina Solar white paper, and that is so I know how big I want my background to be, and that's essentially my kind of card front piece of paper. I'm adding some liquid glue here. This is the Ranger Multi-Medium in the matte finish. It is nice and strong, and I need it to be nice and strong. And also the piece of 80-pound paper is cut to exactly the size that I need for my card front, because I want there to be a nice little border. So I've taken off all those little pieces that were holding it together just for a minute in the front. I had a couple of pieces on the corners, and then I'm just lifting up all those extra flaps, adding a tiny little bit of glue underneath so that I know everything is well glued down and nothing is going to come apart. Then I'm just using that piece of paper as a guide and trimming all around it, because I knew that that was exactly how big I needed my piece. And then just because there are a whole lot of raw edges there now, I'm going to take the domed blending tool that I used in the beginning with the chipped sapphire on it and just go around the edges lightly. I don't want to add a whole lot of colour, but I do want to take away those white edges where I have cut, and this will turn them that same blue colour. Now it's kind of time to start putting everything together, which is the exciting part for me. So here is the stem. I'm just going to cut off that little mistake part that we did with the zig marker, and then I'm just placing everything out and putting together the flower. So this layer here I'm going to put down just with the liquid glue, and I've kind of bent it up with my fingers a little bit. Then with the very top layer, I'm actually going to add a little bit of foam. This is just some tiny wee foam strips just to the outside edges, so that when they put this in the envelope, it won't be going through the mail at all, but when they put it in the envelope to give to the lady, then it won't get flattened out completely. So then I add a little bit of double-sided tape right in the middle, so that there is just dimension around the leaves and not in the center of the flower. Again, I figured since I'm using the foam strips, I'm going to use one to go on the stem, and that pops that up just a little bit. I couldn't decide if I wanted it on an angle or straight, but in the end, straight is good for me, and I add some liquid glue. I add plenty so that I know that it is not going to go anywhere, and once this is all dried, it is going to be well stuck down. I add a little bit of foam tape to each side of the sentiment, and then that way it will pop up sitting over top of the stem, because the stem is also popped up, remember. And then I'm just going to adjust the little leaves. Now I did have to kind of cut these because I didn't want to cover the sentiment that much so that you couldn't read it, so I needed to be a little bit careful of that. I ended up popping a little bit of foam tape to support some parts of the leaves, and then a little bit of glue as well, so that I knew it wasn't going to go anywhere. So that leaf just covered up a little too much of the sentiment, so make sure that you can cut apart your stamps even once they're stamped, and kind of make them work exactly for you, how you want for your project. So I'm going to tuck that one right in. And then, as I said, I think this ended up being 4.5 by 6.5 maybe, this woven panel here, and then it went onto a 5 by 7 card. I think I've done some other cards before that were larger and bigger, but I think this was kind of the first specific 5 by 7 card that I had completed. I made my own envelope for it using one of the techniques that I showed in my envelopes, how to make your own envelopes video. I have that video on my channel as well. And then that is this card done for today. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed this, and let me know if you give the woven background technique a go. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks, bye!